Our speaker this morning is the President and CEO of the Council of Alcohol and Drugs. Since 1996, he has been the State Director of Drugs Don't Work in Georgia. He is a former undercover narcotics agent and has won numerous awards from the DEA and the FBI for outstanding service in the field of law enforcement. Under his direction, the Drugs Don't Work in Georgia program has been adopted by 68 counties in Georgia. How many more counties we got to go, Chuck?
There's 159 total.
So there we are. We need a lot of people out there helping us spread the word, okay? This program has been named one of the fantastic substance abuse prevention programs by the Center of Substance Abuse, the National Center of Advancement of Drug Prevention, and the Centers and Application of Prevention Technologies. I have taken this seminar, Chuck, and we have a lot of instructors and speakers in this company. And I can tell you he is one of the most fabulous speakers that we've ever had come speak for us, and we're glad to have him. So please join me in welcoming Chuck Wade.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As Mark said, I'm the President and CEO of the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, which is a 42-year-old nonprofit drug and alcohol prevention agency headquartered here in Atlanta. Before I took this job, I was a police officer for 15 years, and for 11 of those years, I worked as an undercover narcotics agent. So for 11 years, I lived with drug users, drug dealers, and drug addicts. I spent a lot of time sitting and talking with those folks on their roach-infested sofas, and there were many times I would watch them leave and go off to work so knee-walking drunk or so stoned out of their minds I don't know how they made it. For many years of my life while I was working undercover, I had long hair. Here's a couple of pictures of me from back then. That's me in the blue coat there. Look at this next goofy picture. How about that Dutch boy haircut there? So for many years I had long hair. I wore 2 earrings in my ear. I still have the tattoos. And from that experience I learned a few things about the drug problem in our country. The first thing I learned is just how serious the drug problem is. I think it's the most serious problem facing us as a nation. I'm convinced that drugs are a contagious terminal plague on the United States of America. And I'm afraid if we don't get serious now and do something to stop this drug problem, our country will end up like the Roman Empire. I'm sure you all remember reading about the Roman Empire in your history books back in high school, and I know that you'll remember that the Roman Empire was a world power. As a matter of fact, there was a saying back then that went, "All roads lead to Rome." That's just how powerful the Roman Empire was. And the people who lived in the Roman Empire suffered from the same thing that we as Americans suffer from. It's called ethnocentricity. It means that they, just like us, thought that they were the greatest race of people on the earth and that their country would be there forever. Where's the Roman Empire? It's gone. Stood for almost 500 years and it crumbled. And it was destroyed not by some foreign power that invaded, it was destroyed from within by the people who lived in that country. And as one of your frontline soldiers out there fighting that war on drugs for you for 11 years, I promise you, history is indeed repeating itself. The United States of America is a 234-year-old world power that will not survive to 500 years if we don't do something to stop this drug problem. That's just how bad it is, folks. The drug problem is worse than it's ever been. It's getting worse every day. If you doubt that, you tell me a time in America's history when we had 11-year-old children shooting each other in the face with 9mm handguns. Now that's happening on a regular basis all across this country, and not just in the inner cities, not just in Chicago and Detroit and New York and Atlanta. In little bitty Smyrna, Georgia, where I worked my last year and a half in law enforcement as a crimes against persons detective, we had 4 shootings in that year and a half. 3 of those shootings were murders, and all 3 of those murders were committed by boys under the age of 16. In one case, this 15-year-old boy walked into a crowded apartment complex parking lot, pulled a .45 automatic out of his waistband, and opened up on a crowd of people that were milling around there. There were about 40 folks having a block party. He just began firing at random into the crowd. Shot one guy in the back, bullet came out his chest and killed him. Shot a kid in the elbow. It was a miracle more people weren't hurt or killed in that shooting. And all 3 of those murders, committed by those babies in little bitty Smyrna, Georgia, were directly drug-related. As I said, the drug problem is worse than it's ever been. It's getting worse every day. We must do something to stop it. And Lord knows we've been trying. Since 1990, the United States of America has spent more than $290 billion of your federal tax money trying to stop drugs from coming into America. $290 billion with a B. That's more money than we spent on all biomedical research combined. Folks, we spent more of your tax money trying to stop drugs from coming into America than we spent on finding a cure for cancer, arthritis, and heart disease combined. Now let me ask you a question. What's been the result of this enormous expenditure of your federal tax dollars? Well, in the last 10 years, cocaine and heroin production over in source countries has doubled. Cocaine and heroin are cheaper today on the streets of America than they've ever been. So after throwing billions and billions and billions of your tax dollars at the supply side of America's drug problem, not only have we not stopped it, it's gotten twice as bad. And the truth is, folks, we're never going to be able to stop drugs from coming into America. It's absolutely impossible. I'll tell you why. You see, it only takes 10 tractor-trailer loads of cocaine, pure cocaine, to supply the United States with all the coke it needs for 1 year. So imagine trying to figure out which trucks are bringing in the coke at what point and stopping them. It's impossible. It can't be done. Here's a picture of me and our narcotics squad. That's me seated on the right there from the early 80s with 7 pounds of cocaine, several $1,000s in cash, and some weapons that we seized from an undercover investigation that began in a business in Marietta, Georgia. And that 7 pounds of cocaine is not a spit in the ocean compared to the amount of coke that goes through Cobb County alone every single day. It only takes one airplane the size of a Boeing 747 airplane loaded with heroin, pure heroin, to supply the United States with all the heroin it needs for 1 year. So imagine trying to figure out which large airplane or which smaller planes are smuggling in the heroin at what point and stopping them. That too is impossible. Here's a picture of me and my partner from the early 90s with a pound of heroin that we seized from an undercover investigation that began in a business in Smyrna, Georgia. And that pound of heroin is nothing to the amount of heroin that goes through Cobb County every day. It only takes one 25 square mile tract of land to grow enough opium poppies or enough coca plants to produce enough heroin or enough cocaine to supply this country with all those drugs it needs for 1 year. So you see, it doesn't matter how many coca fields we destroy over in source countries like Colombia and Peru. It doesn't matter how many opium poppies we eradicate over in source countries in the Middle East like Afghanistan and other Middle Eastern countries. They've already warehoused up enough processed heroin and processed cocaine to supply this country with all those drugs it needs for the next 20 years. In Mexico, drug smugglers are flying cocaine across our borders in radio-controlled airplanes. Little airplanes that are so small, not only are they invisible to radar, they're invisible to visual observation. Up in Canada, enterprising drug smugglers have figured out a way to form cocaine into a plastic-like substance that they're molding, among other things, into these air cargo kennels that you use to carry your pets on board commercial airliners, and they're smuggling in coke in that way. Not long ago, this 57-year-old man and his 62-year-old wife, Rachel, were apprehended as they attempted to drive across the United States border from Mexico with $68 million worth of cocaine concealed in their motorhome. Now, when our grandma and grandpa can be drug smugglers, how are we ever going to stop dope from coming into this country? It's absolutely impossible. It cannot be done. A few years ago, my good friends at the Drug Enforcement Administration located this underground tunnel. It was a 5-foot by 5-foot concrete tunnel, 30 feet under the ground, that ran from the drug smuggler's home in Mexico underneath the United States border to his cocaine warehouse in Douglas, Arizona, some 293 feet. It was equipped with electronic sump pumps to keep it dry and a system of pulleys for moving cocaine and money back and forth underneath the earth. It cost him $1.5 million to build the tunnel. The way you got into the tunnel was by pushing a button in his home that raised an $18,000 pool table off the floor, revealing the entryway. When the DEA found the tunnel, they also found the bones of the workers he had hired to dig it, because when they completed it, he shot him execution style in the back of the head and buried him there so they couldn't reveal the location. Also, when the DEA found that tunnel, they said, "We cannot begin to estimate the number of these tunnels that run underneath our borders for the purpose of smuggling drugs." So you see, ladies and gentlemen, in order to stop drugs from coming into America, we would have to build an impenetrable dome, not only over the United States, but underneath the United States. And of course, that's impossible. We can't do anything like that. And we're not going to close off our borders. America's always been a friendly country. We're not going to seal off our borders just to keep drugs from coming in here. That's not going to happen. The point is, attacking the supply side of America's drug problem has not worked in the past. It is not working now. It will not work in the future. And I'm going to tell you a secret that the politicians forget to tell you when they say they need your tax money to attack the supply side of America's drug problem. And let me stop for just a minute and point something out to you that you might not realize. Sometimes politicians lie. I know that's hard to believe. Remember what Bill said when they asked him if he had ever smoked marijuana? He said, yes, but I didn't inhale. Come on, folks. Sometimes those rascals will just outright lie. Sometimes they'll lie by omission, by leaving things out. What happens in this case is that they conveniently forget to tell us that even if we could stop all the drugs from coming into America, which is absolutely impossible now, but if a miracle occurred, and that's what it would take, a miracle, if the good Lord suddenly waved His hand and we were able to stop every grain of cocaine and heroin from coming into America tomorrow, and I said grain like a grain of sand, not gram. If we could stop every grain of cocaine and heroin from coming into America tomorrow, the very next day, drug dealers would be manufacturing synthetic cocaine and synthetic heroin in clandestine or hidden laboratories all across this country. They can do that now. The only reason they don't right now is it's just cheaper for them to import the drugs right now. If we could stop all the coke and heroin from coming in, which we cannot, if we could send our law enforcement officers rushing out that next day to shut down all those hidden labs that would pop up and begin manufacturing those drugs synthetically, which would be impossible, well, it still wouldn't affect our marijuana problem, would it? You see, we home grow marijuana with a THC content of over 60%. THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is the active ingredient in marijuana that makes you high. 10 years ago, the best we could produce here on U.S. soil, the best we could produce domestically, was 3% THC. It's up over 60% now. That's American ingenuity for you. So you see that marijuana joint you might have smoked back in high school or college? That is not the same pot our kids are smoking today. Today it is a much more serious, a much more potent, a much more dangerous, and yes, indeed, a much more addictive drug. Marijuana is in fact an addictive drug. Medical science has proven that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And if anyone happens to still doubt it, I'll be glad to debate it head-to-head, nose-to-nose, toe-to-toe with any so-called drug expert in this country, and I guarantee you I'll win that debate. Marijuana is an addictive drug. If you doubt that, ask any one of the 150,000 people who are currently in treatment for marijuana addiction in this country right now. If you doubt it, I'll bring Brian in here. Brian's been smoking pot since he was a kid. Brian is a living, breathing, flesh and blood person. I'll bring him in here to talk to you, and he will tell you how he is so badly addicted to marijuana that he cannot go one day without getting high. He'll tell you that because he is so badly addicted to marijuana, he cannot keep a job, he cannot function in society, he is not able to raise his children, Tyson and his son Zachary, because their mother is so badly addicted to methamphetamine because when she was very young and her and Brian started dating, he got her started smoking pot. She, like many, many people, graduated from marijuana to the harder drugs. People say marijuana is not a gateway drug. Folks, don't believe it. It absolutely is a gateway drug. It has ruined many lives. Marijuana is an addictive drug, in spite of what you read on the internet. Now, there is a lot of pro-drug propaganda on the internet right now, and our kids are eating that up. Now, you folks know the internet is nothing but an open sewer of information. Anybody can post anything on the internet that they want at any time. Does that mean it's true? Well, let me ask you this. There is a group of doctors, medical doctors. They have medical degrees, and they're pedophiles. They formed an association, and they have a very strong internet presence. Matter of fact, they just met at a five-star hotel, five-star Sheraton Hotel in California, in San Francisco. They had a huge meeting, and the meeting was about how they need to make pedophilia acceptable in society. Now, these doctors, medical doctors, they believe that love, sexual love between an adult and a child is a good and healthy thing. They point to societies in the past that have encouraged that. And they say being a pedophile is actually something honorable and good. It's good for the adult, it's good for the child. So they're trying to pass these laws saying that pedophilia should be accepted in society and it should not be illegal. As a matter of fact, they don't like the term pedophile. They say that it has some kind of negative connotations to it, so they're trying to change that. They want to be called MAP, M-A-P, minority attracted or minor attracted persons, and they probably will succeed in that. In the same way that there was a huge push to legalize gay marriage, in the same way that there's a huge push to legalize drugs, and the marijuana legalizers, by the way, have a very detailed strategy for legalizing marijuana. We actually have a copy of it. It's a 20-point strategy. Step number 1, legalize marijuana as medicine. Step number 2, legalize marijuana entirely. Step number 3, legalize all the other drugs. Now you might say, well, that's insane. There's no way they could legalize marijuana as medicine. That's crazy. Friends, did you know 16 states have voted to legalize marijuana as medicine? Marijuana is legal as medicine in 16 states. Now I want you to think about that for a minute. The active ingredient in marijuana, tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient that makes you high, does have some very, very minor medicinal benefits. It's been available for years in the form of a prescription drug called Marinol. Because what the medical scientists do is they take the plant, they take the marijuana plant into a laboratory under sanitary conditions, they extract the medicine out of the tetrahydrocannabinol, and they put it in the form of tablets or capsules called Marinol. So if you're a glaucoma patient and you need Marinol to relieve the pressure on your eye, the doctor will give a prescription for Marinol. But they don't do that. You know why? Because there are so many other drugs that are so much more effective at treating glaucoma patients than Marinol. But it's been available for years in the form of pills or capsules or tablets. There's a lot of things in nature that have medicinal benefits. For example, the bark of the yew tree, the Y-E-W yew tree in Africa has medicinal benefits. Now, if you need the medicine in the bark of the yew tree, does the doctor tell you to go chew on the tree and get all of that bacteria and everything that goes along with it in order to get the minor benefits of the medicine? Of course not. You know, snake venom under certain circumstances has medicinal value. If you need that snake venom, the medicine in the snake venom, does the doctor tell you to go get bit by a rattlesnake? Of course not. They take the snake in the lab, they milk the venom out, they extract the medicine from it, and they give it to you in the form of a shot or a pill or a capsule, right? If you feel like you need marijuana to treat your whatever ailment you have, and by the way, the marijuana legalizers say marijuana is a harmless, benign drug. In fact, they say it is a miracle drug that cures everything from headaches to hangnails. So if you feel like you need the medicine in marijuana, is it absolutely necessary for you to smoke a joint and inhale all of those cancer-causing carcinogenics and all those 70 other chemicals that are harmful, that have been proven harmful to human beings? Does it make sense? Of course not. It's insane. And anyone with half a brain cell in their head will realize marijuana is not acceptable as medicine. And the American Medical Association has said this association will never, ever approve smoking something as a delivery vehicle for medicine. That's insane. Folks, you know, if I take one of these folders here and I roll it up and I light it on fire and I inhale it into my lungs, that's going to be harmful to me. Human lungs were not designed to have hot smoke enter into them. So to say that you need to smoke a marijuana joint to get the very minimal benefits from it is insane. Now, I don't want to prevent anyone from getting their medicine as long as it really helps them. And I have heard people say, and I've read blogs where people say, I've had back pain my entire life. The only thing that helps with my back pain is for me to smoke a joint. That's the only thing that helps with my back pain. Folks, I understand back pain. I've had back pain my entire life. When I was 17 years old, I was working for North American Container Corporation, and the guy I was working with, and I went to let this $400 pallet that was leaning up against the wall down onto these rollers so that we could stack some materials on it and the forklift could pick it up. As I got one corner and he got one corner and we were backing up, because he was so stoned out of his mind that day, he tripped over the rollers and fell, and I twisted to hold the roller off of him, twisted my back. I was in the hospital at 17 years old for a month. My back has never been right. I am in constant pain from my back. Now, I do know that if I do some light exercise, that it greatly helps with the pain. I know there's some things I can do, some relaxation techniques, some deep breathing, and it helps with the pain. Wouldn't it be insane for me to smoke a marijuana joint to make my back stop hurting? That's just crazy. I'll share something with you, and this is something that even my staff members don't know about me. I suffer from depression. Everyone in my family suffers from depression. And if you think depression's not painful, think again. Have you seen the commercial where they say, where does depression hurt? All over. I'm in constant pain from depression. Now, I could go to the doctor, he could prescribe antidepressants, and I could have to take a pill for the rest of my life. I choose not to do that. I deal with the depression in other ways. I know that if I exercise, it greatly helps with the depression. I can live depression-free if I exercise. I also know, though, that if I eat a great deal of chocolate, it will make the depression go away immediately and will keep it away for at least a couple hours. Now, if I eat an entire chocolate cake every single day, I won't have a bit of depression. Now let me ask you folks something. How many of you think that would be a good thing to do? How many of you think a doctor needs to write me a prescription to eat a full chocolate cake every single day? I mean, how long would it be until I was so obese and had, type 2 diabetes before it killed me? It doesn't make sense. Just because eating the chocolate cake helps my pain doesn't mean I need to eat the chocolate cake, right? Just because smoking a joint might help someone with their headache or their back pain doesn't mean that that's the best way to treat that condition, right? It's insane. And yet, 16 states have legalized marijuana as medicine. And the legalizers are coming here. Get ready. They're going to get it put on the agenda here in Georgia. You will have to vote eventually whether you want to legalize marijuana as medicine or not. Don't fall for it. Folks, it's a smokescreen. Don't fall for that. Marijuana is a dangerous drug. Excuse me. It's an addictive drug. And we grow marijuana in the mountains of North Georgia. We grow it in greenhouses in our backyards. We grow it under grow lights in our basements. We grow it on our kitchen sinks and our bathroom counters. We no longer even need to import marijuana. We grow all we need right here at home. So folks, why on earth do we continue to allow our federal government to spend billions and billions and billions of our tax dollars trying to stop pot from coming into this country? Folks, as long as we allow that to continue, we might as well stand over a giant toilet and flush billion-dollar bills. If we could stop all the coke and heroin from coming in, which we cannot, if we could send our law enforcement officers rushing out that next day to shut down all those hidden labs that would pop up and begin manufacturing those drugs synthetically, which would be impossible. If we could eradicate and destroy every tiny little marijuana plant that was growing in America tomorrow, still wouldn't affect our designer drugs problem, would it? It wouldn't affect our LSD problem, our PCP problem, our ecstasy problem, our methamphetamine problem. We don't have to import any of those drugs. We can make them right here in America. As I said, attacking the supply side of America's drug problem never has been and never will be the solution. But folks, we've got to get serious now and do something to stop this drug problem. It is destroying this country from within. The drug problem is the most serious problem facing us as a nation. Now, how on earth can I stand up here in front of you good people and claim that the drug problem is the most serious problem facing us as a nation in light of what happened to this country on September 11th, 2001? In other words, how could I possibly say the drug problem is a more serious problem than terrorism? Friends, do you have any idea who funded that terrorist attack on this country? You know that operation cost millions of dollars, right? Any idea how that was paid for? Did you know that 75% of the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization's funding comes from the illegal heroin trade? It does. Now, which country do you suppose might be the largest consumer of heroin in the entire world? It's the United States of America. In fact, we are only 4% of the world's population, yet we consume 66% of all the drugs produced worldwide, all the illegal drugs produced worldwide. In that way, folks, we were actually one of Al-Qaeda's best customers. And I'm sad to say that in that way, I'm afraid we might have brought that attack on ourselves. And the truth is, as long as we continue to use illegal drugs in the United States of America, we will continue to fund terrorism. Because every terrorist organization that ever has existed or ever will exist is funded in large part by the illegal drug trade. If you doubt that, let's take Pablo Escobar's cartel, for example, over in Colombia. Escobar was a narco-terrorist, and his career was remarkable. He killed 500 policemen in Medellin, Colombia. He assassinated 4 presidential candidates in that country. He murdered Colombia's justice minister. He blew up a passenger airliner, killing 110 people. He exploded a car bomb in Bogota that killed 57 people. Now, how on earth do you suppose Escobar got away with those violent acts of murder and terror for as long as he did? It was quite simple, really. It was by being the largest supplier of cocaine to the United States of America for more than 15 years, which created such enormous wealth for him that it put him virtually above the law. Currently, Escobar's cartel has been replaced by the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, the FARC. The FARC's 16th Front controls the eastern lowlands and the rainforest in Colombia. That's where all the coca cultivation and cocaine processing takes place. And currently, the 16th Front has become a major supplier of cocaine, not only to the United States of America now, but to the entire world. And they are responsible for acts of violence and terror that take place in Colombia on a weekly basis. And friends, we are helping to fund that. And quite frankly, what goes around, comes around. In the Middle East, Hezbollah and Hamas are using opium crops there to finance their terrorist activities worldwide. In Peru, there's an organization called the Shining Path. It's a guerrilla organization that's been responsible for acts of violence and terror in that country for decades, and they also control the illegal drug trade there. And that's no coincidence. You see, terrorism requires cash to operate. The illegal drug trade is a cash business. This is a case of one evil supporting another. So I'll say it again. As long as we continue to use illegal drugs in the United States of America, we will continue to fund terrorism. You see, even when a teenager goes out and buys a quarter bag of pot, a portion of the money that kid's using to buy that dope with is going to end up in the hands of the Osama bin Ladens and the Pablo Escobars of this world, whether that kid wants to admit it or not. So allow me to repeat it one last time. As long as we continue to use illegal drugs in the United States of America, we will continue to fund terrorism. The drug problem is the most serious problem facing us as a nation. It is destroying this country from within. We must do something to stop it. So what are we going to do? I'm just an old retired cop, folks, but the answer seems pretty darn simple to me, because you see, the drug problem in this country always has been, and it always will be, simple economics. It's supply and demand. Well now, if attacking the supply side has not and will not work, it's simple basic logic, isn't it, friends? What we must do instead is attack the demand side of America's drug problem. All right, if we're going to do that, let me ask you this question. Where is the largest concentration of demand for drugs in this country? Because if we're going to begin attacking the demand side, doesn't it make sense to do so at the largest concentration of demand? So where is that? Where is the largest concentration of demand for drugs in the United States of America? It's in one place. No, it's not the schools. See, that's right, for the last 20 years in a row, the National Institute on Drug Abuse has reported, and they found this through their National Household Survey, for the last 20 years in a row, they have reported that 77% of the people who use illegal drugs in the United States of America are employed. Let me say that again. Gosh, that is an awful big number. 77% of the people who use illegal drugs, now this does not even include alcohol, it's the illegal street drug users. 77% of those drug users work somewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an invisible empire of drug users, drug dealers, and drug addicts in the American workplace. And when I say the American workplace, I'm including, for example, beautiful downtown Lawrenceville, Georgia, where we are right now. Because the last time I checked, this community was still in the United States of America. They're still part of the American workforce, and they have just as serious a drug problem in this community as anywhere else in this country. And if they doubt that, I would respectfully submit they're simply in denial. Ladies and gentlemen, there really is an invisible empire of drug users, drug dealers, and drug addicts in the American workplace. Now, I know that's hard for some people to believe because it's invisible. And since it's invisible, as far as they're concerned, it does not exist. Yes, it does exist, my friends. I promise you it exists. I moved within that empire every day for 11 years while I was working undercover. Give me just a minute to explain to you why this is true. You see, a drug dealer would much rather sell his or her drugs at work. Why is that? Several reasons. First and foremost, it greatly reduces the risk of being arrested. You see, if all he or she has to do is load the dope in the trunk of their car and drive to one place to work, stick the drugs in their locker and sell to their coworkers, that means they don't have to put all that dope in their car and drive all over town, here in Lawrenceville, for example, to points A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, delivering to their customers, taking a chance that while doing so they might be involved in an accident and the police will discover the drugs and take them to jail, or they might inadvertently commit some minor traffic violation and some sharp police officer will stop them and find the drugs and arrest them. They don't have to worry about that so much if they only have to go to one place to sell their drugs. By selling drugs at work, the drug dealer has immediate access to a wide customer base. Now, you people are in business. Surely you all understand the importance of being close to your customers, right? So do the drug dealers. You see, it's so easy to bring your dope to work, stick it in your locker and sell, or stick it in your toolbox and sell to your coworkers and say, here's your pot, here's your coke, here's your acid, here's your ecstasy. You can even extend credit to your customers at work because you know where they're going to be on Friday when they get paid, and you can go collect your money. Try that out on the streets. If you front your dope on the streets, you're never going to see your drugs or your money again. You're going to get ripped off. That's another reason people like to buy and sell drugs at work. It's just so much safer. You see, a coworker is not going to pull a gun and say, give me your drugs and your money. That does not happen at work, folks. Now, that does happen every day out on street corners all across America. People are killed over $20 worth of crack cocaine, but not at work. It's just much safer to buy and sell drugs at work. By buying and selling and using drugs at work, the drug dealer, the drug buyer, and the drug user are insulated from law enforcement. Because, ladies and gentlemen, law enforcement does not police the workplace. Law enforcement polices the streets, and they've got their hands full out there. They don't have the manpower, the finances, or the resources to police every little workplace. When's the last time you saw a patrol car pull up in front of your place of business and a police officer get out and walk through to make sure there's no drug using or drug dealing going on? That's not how it's designed. And I promise you, the drug user, the drug dealer, and the drug buyer, they know that. They know these workplaces are a little free zone for buying and selling drugs. If we had another 5 or 6 hours together, I believe I could convince each and every one of you that there really is this invisible empire of drug users, drug dealers, and drug addicts in the American workplace. And I'm firmly convinced, based on my 15 years law enforcement experience, 11 of those years spent working undercover and living with drug users and drug dealers and drug addicts, my 16 years experience as the state of Georgia's drug-free workplace director, my 6 years experience as the president and CEO of the 42-year-old nonprofit Council on Alcohol and Drugs, based on all that experience, I am 100% convinced if we could simply just get every single business in the state of Georgia to just become a drug-free workplace, well, I believe we could reduce the drug and the crime problem in this state by 77%. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the drug and the crime problem are one and the same. You ask any police officer, they'll tell you. So I have a suggestion for you today. Why don't we, those of us in this room right now, why don't we agree that we're going to go out here in Lawrenceville, for example, and we're going to call on every single business in this community, and we're going to get them to become a drug-free workplace. Now, if we could do that, let me tell you what would happen. If we could simply get every single business in Lawrenceville to become a drug-free workplace, we would reduce the drug and the crime problem in this community by 77%. I guarantee you local law enforcement could take care of the other 23%. Lawrenceville, Georgia could become the only truly drug-free, crime-free community in the United States of America. They could stand as a shining example to the rest of the country and say, hey, America, look what we did. We're drug and crime free. And when America said, Lawrenceville, how on earth did you do that? Their answer would be simple. If you do business in Lawrenceville, Georgia, you're a drug-free workplace or you don't do business here. There's an answer to the drug problem in this community and in this country if you care. And I'm sure that you do care. I'll bet you'd like to help clean up your backyard to give your children a safe drug-free environment in which to grow up. I'll bet you'd like to see all these workplaces become drug-free so that when it's time for your child or your grandchild to enter the workforce, they would be going to work in a safe, drug-free work environment. And ladies and gentlemen, don't we all have that right? Don't we have a right to work in a safe, drug-free work environment? You know, sometimes when we implement a drug-free workplace program in a company, we'll have a handful of employees who will whine and cry and moan and groan, and they'll say things like this. They'll say, oh, nay, nay. No, you're not going to drug test me. That's an invasion of my privacy. Or they'll say, you can't drug test me. That's a violation of my civil rights. And when they say that, I just have to get in their face and ask them this question. What document have you been reading? Because it's certainly not the Constitution of the United States of America, nor its Bill of Rights. Because you see, nowhere in there does it give you a right to use illegal drugs. And the last time I checked, illegal drugs were still illegal. So you see, no one has a right to get high, even in their own home. But I'll say, listen, since you're such an expert on civil rights, let's talk about rights. Let's talk about your coworkers' rights. Let's talk about their right to work in a safe, drug-free work environment, which overrides your so-called supposed right to get high. You know what, friends? We've known for years now through extensive research, and this is research ironically conducted by our federal government and paid for with your tax dollars, and that research has proven unequivocally that the most cost-efficient and the most effective ways of combating substance abuse and drug-related crime is through drug prevention. That means stopping it before it ever starts. Drug treatment. That means getting those well who are already addicted. And drug education. Drug prevention, drug treatment, drug education. Now, our government, federal government, knows stopping drugs at the source, interdiction, is not the solution to the drug problem. How do they know that? Because they've done tons of research on it, and they know that does not work. And yet, they continue to spend billions and billions of dollars on interdiction efforts. Why is that? Does anyone know why that is? It's because the general public has not yet been educated to a level where they understand that attacking the supply side of the drug problem never has and never will work, and that instead we need to reallocate those billions of dollars into attacking the demand side of the drug problem in this country. The general public does not understand that. So in order for a politician to get elected, what they have to say, they have to cater to the general public, and they have to say, listen, we have a serious drug problem in America. I'm going to do something about it. If you vote for me, I will stop that crap from coming into this country. That's how they get elected. And then once they're elected, of course, they want to keep that campaign promise. They continue to waste billions of our tax dollars attacking the supply side of the drug problem. The federal government knows that incarceration is not the answer. I know that personally. During my law enforcement career, I put literally thousands of people in jail just to watch them get right back out and start using and dealing drugs again the next day. Never has been, never will be the answer. But the solution's very simple. It's drug prevention, drug treatment, drug education. That's how you attack the demand side of America's drug problem. Prevention, treatment, and education. Guess what? When you have a simple little drug-free workplace program, you have all three of those elements. Drug prevention, drug treatment, drug education. Allow me to mention something to you very briefly, if I may, about the importance of drug education. There's an organization called PRIDE. It stands for the Parents Resource Institute on Drug Education. It's a nationwide nonprofit, very conservative, very well-respected organization. And they have found, through national household surveys, they have found that children of parents who simply sit down and talk to them about the dangers of drug use, those children are 60% less likely to ever become drug users. Did you hear that, moms and dads? Grandmoms, granddads, did you hear what I just said? Our babies are 60% less likely to ever use drugs the first time if we just talk to them about the dangers of drug use. May I ask how many of you have children? Good Lord, what do you guys do? Lay around and make babies? Okay, folks, I'm not going to ask you, have you talked to your children beginning in their preschool years on a monthly basis, consistently throughout their lives, in age-specific and culturally competent language about the dangers of drug and alcohol use? I'm not going to ask you, have you done that? Because I already know the truth. Most parents haven't. That's okay. I know why they haven't. It's either that they don't know what to say or they're afraid they'll say the wrong thing. But let me tell you something very, very sad, moms and dads, grandmoms, granddads. Let me tell you something very sad. If we had an absolutely free seminar right here in Lawrenceville and we advertised it for months on TV, radio, billboard, newspaper, and magazine ads, and we said, mamas and daddies, grandmoms, granddads, come down here to HB training on Tuesday evening from 6:30 to 7:30. Take one tiny little hour out of your awful busy lives and attend an absolutely free seminar. We're not going to charge you a nickel for it, and if you do that, we 100% guarantee you we will teach you how to raise a drug and alcohol-free child. Now, if we offered that free seminar, honestly, friends, honestly, how many people do you think would show up? I'll tell you what, if 3 whole human beings showed up, I believe I'd have a heart attack. I'm serious. Have an ambulance standing by to rush me to the hospital because I will go into shock if 3 people show up. Now, I know that's harsh, but it's true. How do I know it's true? Because I've offered that free seminar on my own time all over the state of Georgia, and no one attends. As a matter of fact, in my little hometown of Marietta, Georgia, I personally went door to door and handed out 1,500 invitations to parents, inviting them to come to our local church on a Saturday morning to attend an absolutely free 1-hour seminar on how to raise a drug and alcohol-free child. Now, I personally went door to door, handed out 1,500 of those invitations and talked to those moms and dads about the importance of attending that seminar. On the morning of the seminar, you know how many people showed up? 0. Don't be shocked, folks. You know these parents have much more important things to do. You see, they would rather watch SpongeBob on TV than learn to keep their kids drug-free. That is, of course, until you become the parent of a drug-addicted child. That is, without question, the worst nightmare that can happen to a human being on the face of this planet. Because you see, there will be long periods of time in that child's life where you won't know whether they're dead or alive because you won't know where they are. If they do finally show back up at your home, they'll bring their drug-abusing friends with them and they will steal you blind to support their drug habit. If that child does get lucky and makes it all the way to adulthood, they don't overdose and die somewhere along the way, or they're not killed in some drug-related or alcohol-related accident, you will spend a lot of your time on the weekends sitting in the lobby of the local jail, waiting for hours just to get to talk to your kid for a few minutes behind a piece of plexiglass because they're serving time because of crimes they committed due to their drug use. Having a drug-addicted child is the worst nightmare that can happen to a human being on the face of this planet, but parents are just too busy to prevent that. They got much more important things to do than to take an hour out of their lives and learn how to raise a drug and alcohol-free child. Did you know that for more than 20 years now, your federal government has been conducting research on how to raise a drug and alcohol-free child? They've spent millions of your tax dollars and 20 years on this, and guess what? They've identified these very simple drug prevention principles, and they've proven through rigorous research and evaluation, they've proven that if a parent puts these very simple drug prevention principles in place in their child's life, that child is virtually 100% guaranteed of remaining drug and alcohol free. Now, these drug prevention principles, they're very simple. They don't cost any money. It's not time consuming. You just have to know what they are. Now, let me ask you a question, folks. Do you think parents might need to know what those drug prevention principles are? Would you agree that every parent on this planet needs to know what they are? Okay. How am I going to get that information to them? That's called drug education. How can I get that drug education to those parents? I can't get it to them through a free seminar. They will not attend. Believe me, we've tried. We can't get that drug education to those parents through school. They don't go to school anymore. We can't get it to them through church. Even if they attend church, there are no drug education programs available in church. The workplace. The workplace is the only viable delivery vehicle of this drug education to these working parents so it can have a trickle-down effect to their children and help keep America's future and America's future workforce drug-free. So for all these reasons and more that I don't have time to go into, I am absolutely convinced that drug-free workplace programs are the solution to the drug problem in this country. However, can you guess what happens when I or one of my 68 Drugs Don't Work coordinators around this state goes in and sits down one-on-one with a business owner, and we tell them everything I just told you about the importance of having a drug-free workplace? Can you guess what happens when we tell them we want them to implement a drug-free workplace program so that in this way they can help reduce the drug and the crime problem in their neighborhood, in their community? Can you guess what happens when we tell them we want them to implement a drug-free workplace program so that they can provide much-needed drug prevention, drug treatment, and drug education to their employees, and how that's drug education those employees can share with their children and help keep those babies drug-free? Can you guess what happens when we tell these business owners we want them to implement a drug-free workplace program so that in this way they can give back to their community a little of that which they've taken out in the form of profits? Can you guess what happens when we tell them we want them to stand up shoulder to shoulder with the other 9,700 state-certified drug-free workplaces in Georgia and circle the wagons against this contagious terminal plague on our country? Can you guess what happens when we tell them all that? Sure you can. They get so bored, their eyes literally glaze over and roll back in their head, and they kick us out of the office. Because no one ever went into business to save the world, did they, folks? So before we go, we make sure we tell them this, that here in Georgia, by law, when a company goes through 5 simple little steps and becomes a state-certified drug-free workplace, that business, by law, will receive a 7.5% discount on its workers' compensation insurance premiums. Now, you got to admit, 7.5% discount can be a substantial bottom-line savings, even for a small business. What does it translate to in hardline dollars? Let's take a construction company, for example, with, say, 40 employees. By going through 5 simple little steps and becoming a state-certified drug-free workplace, that business would save about $11,000 every single year. Now, you've got to admit, 11 grand a year is a pretty good savings for a small business. But the truth is it pales in comparison to all the other financial reasons for being a drug-free workplace. Did you know that for more than 20 years now, all the Fortune 500 companies have been drug-free workplaces? They have. Why is that? Is it because they got a discount on their workers' comp insurance premiums? No, that's only been available for a few years in a handful of states. But the reason these big boys and girls have done this, and this is one of the reasons they became the big boys and girls to begin with, ladies and gentlemen, it's because they do the right things right. And you see, they know that when you have a drug-free workplace program, you increase your productivity, reduce your absenteeism and your tardiness, cut your workers' comp claims in half, reduce your medical costs by up to 300%, increase your overall workforce morale, cut your turnover rate, reduce theft and other forms of crime in the workplace, and all that positively affects that old infamous bottom line, and that spells M-O-N-E-Y. Strangely, when we explain it to business owners in that way, their eyes don't glaze over and roll back in their head anymore. As a matter of fact, we see little dollar signs come up in their eyeballs, cha-ching, and they sign up, become drug-free workplaces. As a result, here in Georgia alone, we've helped to certify more than 9,700 companies as a drug-free workplace. Altogether, they employ more than 1 million workers. That's 1 million employees here in Georgia who are being subjected to drug testing at work, and the federal government has proven drug testing at work is a deterrent to drug use. That's over 1 million employees, many of them who are parents, who are receiving mandatory drug education at work, delivered to a captive audience that they can then take home and share with their children to help keep America's future drug-free. So for all these reasons and more, I'm absolutely convinced drug-free workplace programs are the solution to the drug problem in this country. And there are quite a few organizations that agree with me. For example, the U.S. Department of Labor. This is U.S. Department of Labor statistics. Working drug-free works. 77% of drug users are employed. 1 in 4 employed Americans between the ages of 18 and 35 have used illegal drugs in the past year. 20% of young workers admit to using marijuana on the job. 66% of the world's production of illegal drugs is consumed in the U.S., although we're only 4% of the world's population. 1/3 of employees know of the sale of drugs in their workplace. 38 to 50% of workers' comp claims are related to substance abuse in the workplace. Substance abusers file 3 to 5 times as many workers' comp claims. They incur 300% higher medical costs and benefits. They're 1/3 less productive. They're tardy 3 times more often than their non-drug using co-workers. They're 2.5 times more likely to be absent 8 or more days a year. You know, friends, one bad hiring decision can cost a company up to $60,000. One drug-using employee can destroy a company from within. I've seen that happen. I've seen one drug-using employee put a company on its knees because, you see, drug use is contagious. It spreads through the workplace. Drug abuse drains more than $100 billion from American business every year. Now, it drains $160 billion from the American economy, $100 billion of that from American businesses. 90% of large businesses have a drug-free workplace program in place. Having a drug-free workplace program turns away 40% of the drug users who would have applied. You know, folks, I've heard this story so many times from so many receptionists, at companies that became a drug-free workplace. And they'll say, you know, we're a construction company, and we have, for example, we have people come to apply for a job. And the receptionist will say, they'll pull up in front of the place of business, and I can see through the glass doors, I can see them get out of the truck, and I know they're coming in to apply for a job. They'll say, once we became a certified drug-free workplace and we put that simple little sticker on our front door, this is what happens. They say, I see them get out, they start walking up to the front door, they see that sticker and they stop like a deer caught in headlights, and they just freeze. They look at that for a few minutes, then they jam their hands in their pockets and turn around and walk off. Do you know how much money you just saved that company by not inadvertently hiring a drug user because of a little sticker? Turns away 40% of the drug users who would have applied. This Cornell University study found that employers experienced a 51% drop in injury rates once drug use was identified and reduced. Companies without a drug-free workplace program get the drug-using rejects. Only 5 to 10% of small to medium-sized businesses have a drug-free workplace program in place. Drug-free workplace programs increase productivity. Drug testing at work deters drug use. Here in Georgia, certified drug-free workplaces receive a state-mandated 7.5% discount on workers' compensation insurance. Now, we also assist companies in other states. Currently, in the United States of America, there are 12 states that have a state-mandated discount on workers' compensation insurance premiums for certified drug-free workplaces. Now, in the other states, in many cases, the insurance providers there will give a voluntary discount to companies that go through the 5 steps and become a drug-free workplace. So even in companies where it's not a state-mandated law, we're assisting companies there. If your company now has or ever hopes to have a contract with the state or with the federal government, this is not a choice. You have to do this. You must maintain a drug-free workplace. And you must prove to them every year that you maintain that contract that you are maintaining a drug-free workplace. Now, our position on that is this. What is the best way to prove to the state or to the federal government that you really have a drug-free workplace? Present them with your state-issued certificate. Every time you apply for that contract or reapply for that contract, just send a copy of your certificate, your current certificate issued by the state of Georgia, saying that you're a drug-free workplace. Drug-free certification is a simple 5-step process. And we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Please, no more than 5 minutes. We have to change the tape. But when you come back in, we're going to go over the 5 steps required for certification. And then we're going to get into something that I think is very important for all of you within a drug-free workplace, but within your personal lives too. And that's how addiction works on the brain. If you, God forbid, now have or ever have a loved one or a friend who becomes addicted, I think it's extremely important for you to understand what's happening within that person. So please, about a 5-minute break. We'll start back at 12 o'clock.
This completes the 1-hour employee education portion of this training. The second hour is for supervisors only.
Okay, in this second hour, we're going to talk about the requirements of state certification here in Georgia. Now, as I said, currently there are 12 states that offer a state-mandated discount on workers' comp insurance for companies that become certified as a drug-free workplace. If a company goes through these 5 steps, they will meet all the requirements in any of those other states. In fact, they'll be going above and beyond the requirement in many of those states. Here in Georgia, as I said, the discount is 7.5%. In the other states, the discount is only 5%. Georgia actually has the highest discount available right now, and that's one of the reasons that Georgia has more state-certified drug-free workplaces than any of those other 11 states. At the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, we assist companies both here in Georgia and in all those other 11 states, and we actually have clients throughout the country in states that don't offer the state-mandated discount, but they're getting discounts from their insurance company voluntarily. Just want to very quickly introduce you to some of our staff. This is our Drug-Free Workplace Division. This is Leanne Mulheron. She's the Vice President of the Drug-Free Workplace Division. This is her assistant, Beth. This is Stacy. She's Vice President of our Client Services. And if any of you are Council on Alcohol and Drugs members, I know that you've spoken to Stacy and you've spoken to Leanne and you've exchanged emails with them many times, so I just wanted you to be able to put a face with the name. We're going to go over now the 5 steps required for certification here in Georgia, and as I said, we'll meet this requirement in all the other states. Step number 1 is very, very simple. Your company must have a substance abuse policy in place that meets all 12 requirements of the state of Georgia. Now that might sound complicated, but it's not at all, because we will email you a fill-in-the-blank policy. It's very simple. A 5th grader could complete it. How do I know? Because when our son was in the 5th grade, we formed a mock company, and I had him get that company certified, and the first thing he had to do is create a substance abuse policy. It's very simple. Fill-in-the-blank policy. It'll take you about 8 to 10 minutes. It is the most legally sound substance abuse policy you can have. We have an attorney on retainer who is an expert in labor law. He's a labor law attorney. He has 25 years labor law experience, but his specialty is drug-free workplace law. He actually wrote the law here in Georgia on drug-free workplace. He's available to our members absolutely free to give you any legal advice at any time, answer any legal questions that you may have. But you're not going to have any legal questions because this is so simple. We've streamlined it so much. We've been doing this for 16 years. We make it very, very easy for companies, both here in Georgia and in all those other states. We have substance abuse policies that meet all the requirements of all the laws in all 50 states. So if a company needs a substance abuse policy, they simply request it from us. We send it to them by email. They fill in the blanks. Honestly, 8 to 10 minutes, you're done. Print that out on your company letterhead and hand it out to all your employees. You've just completed step one. How difficult is that? Very simple. Now, if you are a company here in Georgia and you are a member of your local Chamber of Commerce, you might want to check with them. 68 local Chambers of Commerce here in Georgia offer the Drugs Don't Work program, and they can provide you with assistance on these 5 steps, just like the Council on Alcohol and Drugs can do. So step number 1 is a substance abuse policy. Now, of course, supervisors within a drug-free workplace program, that's the most important thing that they need to do, is to understand the substance abuse policy. Because if a supervisor doesn't understand the policy, how can they enforce it? So it's extremely important. So I'm just going to stop right here on step 1 and ask, does anybody have any questions about the substance abuse policy? Nope, it's very simple. Not rocket science, not brain surgery, right? Step number 2, your company must conduct drug testing. Now, this is limited types of drug testing. Here in Georgia, let's talk first about the types of drug testing you are not required to do. First and foremost, you do not have to drug test your entire workforce. As a matter of fact, none of the 12 states require a company to drug test their entire workforce in order to qualify for the state-mandated discount on workers' comp. That's called blanket testing. That would be expensive. That would hurt morale. It's not required, and we would not recommend it. Now, if you want to drug test your entire workforce, go ahead and knock yourself out. But legally, you don't have to do that. Here in Georgia, you're also not required to do random testing. What's random testing? It's very simple. It's where once a month or once a quarter or once a year you pull a certain percentage of your workforce, 1%, 3%, 5%, 10%, whatever you choose, and you drug test them. That is not required here in Georgia for certification as a drug-free workplace. Now, a few of the other states do require random testing in order to be state certified, but not here in Georgia. So if you're watching this DVD and you have a question about whether you are required to do random testing in your state, just contact us at the Council on Alcohol and Drugs or go to our website, www.livedrugfree.org, click on your state and the information will be there for you. Or just call me directly, 404-223-2277. Any of you are welcome to do that at any time also. So step 1 is the substance abuse policy. Step 2 is the drug testing. The types of drug testing you are not required to do, at least here in Georgia, is blanket testing and random testing. Now, we do strongly encourage you to do random testing, even though it's not required by law, because without it, all you have is a paper tiger. If you're not doing random testing, you don't have any teeth in your program. So we strongly encourage random testing. But again, the law does not require it. All right. If you're not required to do blanket testing and you're not required to do random testing, what kind of drug testing must you do? Very simple. First and foremost, you have to do pre-employment drug testing. So that means anytime you hire someone, you have to drug test them. However, there is an exception to that law. What the law says is you can limit the positions you drug test for to safety-sensitive positions, and you decide what's safety-sensitive. So if you have a receptionist at your company and all she does is bang the phones all day long, she's just answering phones, that may not be considered safety-sensitive to you, and you would not need to drug test when you hire someone into that position. So you decide what's safety-sensitive. But you must do pre-employment drug testing. Now, some people call it job applicant testing, which can be a little confusing for some folks because they think that that means every time somebody comes in and fills out an application, you have to drug test them. Of course not. That's insane. What this applies to is when you know you're going to give someone a job, they've gone through the entire process, they've completed the application, you've done the background check, you've done the reference checking, they've gone through all the interviews, and you know you're going to hire them. The very last thing you do before you put them to work is you drug test them. And basically what you tell them is this: we are going to hire you contingent on you passing this drug test. It's the very last thing you do, job applicant drug testing. Now, how much does a drug test cost? On average, about $25. You can get it a little cheaper. You can do on-site drug testing and get the drug test at a little bit of a less of a price than that. Not all states allow on-site drug testing. Georgia is one of the states that does allow on-site drug testing. As a matter of fact, at the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, we have drug test kits available if you're interested in that. If you purchase drug test kits from us, we used the money, a very small razor-thin profit margin that we make on those drug test kits, to fund our drug prevention programs for children. As I said, the Council is a 42-year-old nonprofit drug and alcohol prevention agency. We appreciate our drug-free workplace members. We appreciate any of our services that you take advantage of, because it truly helps those kids that we're so concerned about. So within step 2, you don't have to do blanket testing or random testing, but you do have to do job applicant testing. But there is the exception in that you can limit it to safety-sensitive positions, and you decide what's safety-sensitive. Also, still within step 2, within drug testing, you must also conduct post-accident drug testing. Now, let me tell you why that is so very important, especially here in Georgia. In Georgia, the law on this is a pro-employer law, not a pro-employee law, pro-employer law. It was written to protect employers, not employees. And here's what that law says. If an employee tests positive for drugs within 8 hours of an accident, or if they test positive for alcohol within 3 hours of an accident, they will not win a workers' comp claim against your company. Now, can someone tell me on average, how much does it cost to treat a back injury? It's about $75,000. How do I know? Because our chief operating officer, on a weekend, a couple of weeks ago, was riding his ATV on his property up in the North Georgia mountains, flipped it over backwards and broke his back. Was in the hospital for a week, wasn't it, Leanne? Wasn't Scott in the hospital for about a week?
Yes, he was.
So far, the bills have run up to about $50,000, but we're not all the way through receiving. So it's about a $75,000 back injury. Now, that was not a workers' comp claim. He wasn't on duty at the time. But if one of your employees gets hurt, they hurt their back, and they file a workers' comp claim, and your insurance company has to pay that $75,000, what's going to happen to your company's workers' comp rates? They're going to go up. Do you know that I personally am aware of businesses that went out of business for one reason and one reason only? They had so many workers' comp claims filed against them, their rates got so high they could no longer afford workers' comp insurance. And as you know, the penalties are pretty severe here in Georgia and in many other states for not having workers' comp insurance. So they were forced out of business. You don't want workers' comp claims filed against you. It also affects the employees. It affects everybody at the company, because when company costs go up, raises and bonuses go down, right? So you don't want workers' comp claims filed against the company. The law in Georgia says if they test positive within 8 hours for drugs or 3 hours for alcohol, it's as if the workers' comp claim was never filed. So post-accident testing is critical. And here's what I say to companies in Georgia. If you are looking at the possibility of becoming a state-certified drug-free workplace, and you realize that there are 5 steps involved, the first step is a substance abuse policy, but you say, yeah, we really don't want a substance abuse policy. We don't want to take the 8 or 10 minutes out of our lives and create that policy. It's just not worth it to us. I say, okay, that's your choice, of course. First of all, I don't think that's very smart, because you're putting yourself in a precarious legal position by not having a substance abuse policy in place. Every company needs a substance abuse policy to protect you, but if you don't want to have one, fine, don't have one. It's your company. If you don't want it, don't do it. A lot of companies might say, we don't want to drug test our employees. We just don't feel that's right. We don't want to impose on them in that way. I say, that's fine. That's up to you if you don't want to drug test your employees. Not very smart, because you might inadvertently hire a drug addict. And as I said earlier, one drug-using employee can destroy a company from within. Every company should be doing drug testing. It's the biggest no-brainer on the planet. Don't know why a company wouldn't want to do it, but it's your company. If you don't want to, don't drug test. That's up to you if you're not going to do random testing or pre-employment screening. But at the very least, please, because you're located in Georgia, at the very least, if you're not going to do anything else, please do post-accident drug testing, because that is a pro-employer law. Not all states have that law. It protects your company, and if you're not doing post-accident drug testing, you're leaving money laying on the table. And then I say to them, but if you're going to do post-accident drug testing, you really need to have a substance abuse policy in place, and why not just do a couple other steps and become certified and get the discount, right? So post-accident drug testing is extremely important. Now, what the law here in Georgia says, and in many other states actually, is that if an employee causes or contributes to an accident, they'll be drug tested. So how about this situation? What if an employee who works in a warehouse needs to get a box off of a top shelf in the warehouse, and they decide to go get the extension ladder and climb up there and get that box? So they go and pick the ladder up, and they put it over their shoulders long ways. They don't carry it in a safe manner, either under their arm or get somebody to help them, or in this position, they carry it long ways like this through the warehouse. And as they're carrying the ladder, they hit an employee in the back of the head with the sharp legs of the ladder, knock that employee down and out, and that employee has to go to the hospital and get stitches. Who do you drug test? Obviously, you drug test the person who carried the ladder, right? Because they caused or contributed to the drug test. The innocent victim who's just standing there doing his job but gets hit in the back of the head, you can drug test him, but you really, at the very least, should drug test the employee who caused or contributed to the accident, right? So post-accident drug testing is required within Step 2, and it's very important pro-employer law here in Georgia and in a few other states. The next kind of drug testing that you must conduct is called reasonable suspicion drug testing. Now, this is where we're going to camp out for a few minutes. We're going to spend the most time talking about reasonable suspicion drug testing because this is the part, the component of drug-free workplace programs that most supervisors struggle with. They don't quite understand what reasonable suspicion drug testing is. So what is it? What is reasonable suspicion drug testing? Reasonable suspicion drug testing, from a legal standpoint, should always, if possible, should always be based on one thing and one thing only: unacceptable work performance. Now, in a minute, I'm going to call on some of you, and I'm going to ask you, in this scenario that I'm about to give you, at what point I have legal, reasonable suspicion to drug test an employee. But if you remember that phrase I just gave you, unacceptable work performance, you will get the answer right. Okay? So I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say that I own a company. We'll say it's here in Georgia. We'll say it's the ABC Awning Company, and we make awnings. I happen to be a state-certified drug-free workplace. You've seen these red and white, green and white canvas awnings that hang out in front of buildings? That's what we do at my little company, the ABC Awning Company. I have a little mini warehouse. I have or a mini manufacturing plant. I have 40 industrial sewing machines set up. I have 40 ladies who work for me. And what they do is they come in every day and they take these big bolts of canvas material and they load them into these industrial sewing machines. They sew them together into these awnings. We ship them out to another company that mounts them on a metal frame, and they're sold to the public. Everybody get the idea? Okay, that's what we do. 40 ladies work for me. One of them is named Leanne and one is named Stacy. Okay? Every morning at 11 o'clock, we have a 15-minute break where all my employees can leave their workstation. They can go to the break room or out in the parking lot. They can smoke a cigarette. They can make cell phone calls, whatever they want to do for 15 minutes. One morning at about 11:05, Stacy comes to me as the CEO of the company. She says, "Chuck, I need to speak to you privately." I say, "Okay, Stacy, come on in the office." She comes in the office. I say, "What's up?" She says, "Chuck, I think Leanne's using drugs." I say, "Stacy, really? What on earth would make you think that?" And she says, "Well, Chuck, I know from my college days that when people smoke a cigarette, they hold it like this, but when they smoke a marijuana joint, they hold it like that." She says, "When the break began, I watched Leanne, and she went out there to her car, and she's been sitting out there in her car smoking something like that. I'm pretty sure it was a marijuana joint." I say to her, "Stacy, would you write that down and sign it?" She says, "I sure would." So she writes down, "I, Stacy Wade, on such and such date at such and such time at the ABC Awning Company, personally witnessed Leanne Mulheron sitting in her car smoking what I believe to be a marijuana joint." What's your name, sir?
Antonio.
Antonio. In this situation, do I have legal, reasonable suspicion to snatch Leanne off of her workstation and take her for a drug test?
No.
No. There is no unacceptable work performance. What do I have? I have hearsay testimony. I heard Stacy say it. I didn't witness Leanne smoking a joint. And in this situation, there are very few circumstances where hearsay testimony would hold up in a court of law. And if there was a lawsuit as a result of this, Leanne's attorney would rip me up on the stand if all I have is Stacy's statement that she saw her smoking something she believed to be a marijuana joint. So I don't quite yet have legal reasonable suspicion to drug test Leanne. I'm sure everybody's clear on that so far, right? All right. Now, because I'm a state-certified drug-free workplace, because I've been trained, I've received supervisor training, I read my monthly supervisor training newsletters, or I've seen the DVD provided by the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to take some action on this. So what am I going to do? I'm going to begin a little investigation on this to see if it's true or not. So I go to my file folder and I get my supervisor forms that were provided to me by the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, and I put those supervisor forms on a clipboard, and at 11:15 when the break ends, I'm standing at the back of my warehouse doors and I watch Leanne get out of her car. And I notice that when she gets out of her car, she stumbles and catches herself on the car to keep from falling. She comes walking across the parking lot to come back in the building, and I notice that she's stumbling as she walks. I look down at my supervisor forms, and it says, stumbles when walks. So I check the block, stumbles when walks, okay? As Leanne passes me coming back into the building, I get a good look at her, and I notice that her eyes are extremely red and bloodshot. She looks like some kind of demon. Her eyes are so bloodshot. I look down at my little form, and it says red bloodshot eyes. So now I've checked stumbles when walks, red bloodshot eyes. She goes and sits down at her workstation. Now everyone please listen very carefully here. Leanne sits down at her workstation. She puts all the safety guards in place exactly as she's been trained. She loads the bolt of material into the industrial sewing machine exactly as she's been trained. She begins to sew the awning together in a safe manner, exactly as she's been trained, at the same rate of productivity that she always has. Okay? However, she's having a little bit of trouble staying awake. I notice that she keeps nodding off, shaking her head to try and stay awake. I look down at my supervisor forms, Antonio, and sure enough, it says nodding off. Now, I've checked stumbles when walks, red bloodshot eyes, nodding off. Okay. Am I going to allow her to continue working under these circumstances? Of course not. It would be insane. The sewing machine needle on this machine is that long. It's an industrial sewing machine. She could run that right through her finger. I'm going to stop the action, of course. So I go over to her workstation, and I say to her, Leanne, how are you doing today? And she looks up at me with her bloodshot eyes, and she says, Chuck, I can't understand what she's saying. She's slurring her speech. So I look down at my supervisor forms, and it says slurred speech. So now I've checked stumbles when walks, red bloodshot eyes, nodding off, slurred speech. What's your name, sir? DW. DW. At this point, be very careful now. Do I have legal, reasonable suspicion to take Leanne for a drug test? DW says I have more than enough. How many of you agree with that? Nobody raised their hand. We got two. Two say I have more than enough legal, reasonable suspicion. Okay? Bear with me for just a minute, gentlemen. I stop the action. Leanne, stop. Shut your machine down. Come in the office with me. So Leanne comes in the office, and I say, have a seat. She sits down, and I say, what's going on today? What do you mean? See, Leanne, you were stumbling across a parking lot. Your eyes are red and bloodshot. You're slurring your speech. You're having trouble staying awake. What on earth is going on? And Leanne says, Chuck, I have the worst seasonal allergies of anybody on this planet. And when the break began, I went out to my car, and I believe I had the worst allergy attack I've ever had in my life. When I have these allergy attacks, my eyes start to itch. And I've been sitting out there for 15 minutes rubbing my eyes, so I'm sure they are extremely red and bloodshot. She says, when I have these allergy attacks, my nose runs like a faucet, but at the same time, my ears get stopped up with congestion. That throws off my equilibrium. I'm sure I was dizzy. I'm sure I was stumbling across the parking lot because I feel dizzy as we speak. She says, I have to get this allergy attack under control. As you know, I'm a single mom. I'm raising, 2 teenagers. I can't just go home because I have an allergy attack. I've got to get it under control. You pay us by the hour. I can't just leave. So I went into my purse, and I pulled out my over-the-counter allergy medicine, my Benadryl, and I took 2 of them to try to get the allergy attack under control. Now, that might not be very smart, but it's not illegal, is it? She says, whenever I take these allergy pills like this, it hits me like a freight train and makes me sleepy. So I was having trouble staying awake. I'm sure I was nodding off. And I say, all right, Leanne, I guess that makes sense, but listen, one of my 40 employees, I'm not going to tell you who, but one of my 40 employees said that they saw you sitting out in the car smoking a marijuana joint. And Leanne says, oh, I'm sure it was Stacy. And I say, why on earth would you say it's Stacy? And she says, because I just took her boyfriend from her, and she's upset. She's just trying to get me in trouble, so she made that up. And you all know that old saying, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Stacy's been scorned. She didn't see her smoking anything. Now, I'm being a little facetious to make a point here because I really want to drive this home to you guys. Physical observation alone can be enough, but it's much, much better if you have unacceptable work performance to go along with that. You need to conduct an investigation to find out what's going on. Because in this case, DW, if you had taken her for a drug test and she came back negative and she decided to sue the company, she's going to sue me as the CEO, she's going to sue you as her supervisor, right? She might have a case. And Bob, you're an attorney. What do you think? Is there a chance that she might win under those circumstances? Yeah, it is a possibility. So we just want to avoid that altogether if we can. So if you've got unacceptable work performance, you're in a much better position now. Reverse all that. Let's say that what Stacy saw really did happen. She really was smoking something. Let's say that it's not an allergy attack at all. She's just lying through her teeth, right? Let's say that over the next 3 weeks, I keep an eye on Leanne, right? And I make notes on her job performance because, by the way, I'm a supervisor and that's what I'm paid to do. See, I'm not paid to be a police officer. I'm not paid to be a psychologist. I'm not a medical doctor, right? But I am paid to supervise and to monitor work performance. That's my job. So I'm monitoring Leanne's work performance over the next 3 weeks. So fast forward 3 weeks from now. Now, I've got my supervisor forms that were provided to me by the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, and I can tell you because I've been keeping track of this on my forms, and it just takes a millisecond to do this, I can tell you that in the last 3 weeks, Leanne has been absent 7 times in 3 weeks. How do I know that? It's right here on my supervisor forms. I know that on the days that she did make it into work, she was at least an hour late. How do I know that? Because I've marked her tardy and put the time that she came in each of those days. I know that on Monday of last week, Leanne called in and said, Chuck, I can't come to work today. My maternal grandmother died and I've got to go to her funeral. How do I know that? Because I noted it on Leanne's form here, G-Mom died, funeral absent. She called in again on Thursday of the same week, and she said, Chuck, I can't come to work today. My maternal grandmother died and I've got to go to her funeral. Folks, her grandmother died twice in the same week. Now, at my company with 40 ladies, all coming to me all the time with their problems and issues, if I'm not keeping track of this and documenting it, I'm not going to be aware of what's going on, right? But I know that Leanne's been absent 7 days. She's been tardy every day that she did make it into work. I know that she lied about her grandmother dying. I know that she's been leaving the work site without permission. Every Friday for the last 3 Fridays in a row, she left at 3:30. She just snuck out and she's gone. Leanne, you know we don't close till 6. She left at 3:30 every single day. I know that she's had a very poor attitude with her co-workers. I know her and Susie got into a shouting match out there on my manufacturing floor. Now, I can't have that kind of behavior in my workplace, so very poor attitude with her co-workers. I know her productivity has gone downhill. She's gone from sewing 9 awnings an hour to 3 awnings an hour, and I've documented that on my little supervisor forms. Again, very simple, very easy to do. It's what supervisors are supposed to do. It's what they're paid to do. That's what is their job, right? The forms just make it very easy for them. Now, based on the unacceptable work performance, even without Stacy's statement, even without my physical observations of Leanne, based on the unacceptable work performance, do I have legal, reasonable suspicion to drug test her? Absolutely. 20 years of case law that backs you up. Do not be afraid to pull a reasonable suspicion drug test on an employee when you have very well documented unacceptable work performance. That's what you always want. But DW, that was a good answer, you know, because of course you can't let the action continue, but you might not have any other unacceptable work performance. It may be a situation where you've got to take action right then, but you want to investigate a little more and try to have more than just the physical observations. Because if you were put on the stand, you know, in this case, and Leanne's attorney said, DW, why did you take her for a drug test, and you say because she looked like she was drunk, for example, then he would ask you what kind of training you have. Are you a certified police officer? What classes have you taken that help you identify when someone's drunk? And if you don't have that kind of training, it's going to look bad if it's a jury trial to the jury or even to the judge. So you have to be very careful about that because you're not expected to have that kind of training, but you are expected to monitor work performance. So everybody clear on that? I just saw a hand go up. Was there, yes?
I just have a quick question. If you are documenting this, are you okay just to document it yourself upon what you're seeing, or do you need to take this to the employee and say, for example, you were 3 hours late, I had to call you, I had to find you, I had to call your mom, you know.
Very good
late,
question.
Sign this.
Yes.
You know, you're laying on your desk.
Right.
You're,
Sure, whatever.
It's happened.
Right. The
you
question is, if you're documenting this along the way, do you notify the employee
Right,
of
right.
each infraction?
Right.
Well, that would depend on your policy at your company, you know. I think it's best to discuss each infraction with the employee, you know, and if they continue on beyond that after you've warned them, they continue with that particular action or some other unacceptable work performance, I think that just adds to your credibility here because you did try to correct the action along the way. So there's no problem at all. Of course, you know, you should talk to them about that. You don't want to, you're not going to sandbag them, in other
Right.
words. You're not going to just load the gun against them and then all of a sudden pull the trigger, you know. So, of course, you would want to be talking to them about it along the way. Hopefully, they will correct their action after the first time you speak with them. But if not, and those things continue, then you continue to document it. So, very good question. Thank you. Reasonable suspicion drug testing. Don't be afraid to pull a reasonable suspicion drug test. If you believe that an employee is suffering from a drug or alcohol problem and you do not do a reasonable suspicion drug test, you are enabling that employee to continue. Drug addiction is a chronic progressive disease. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. It will get worse and worse unless something breaks that cycle of addiction. As a supervisor in a drug-free workplace, you're in a position to possibly even save that person's life if you pull a reasonable suspicion drug test on them. Now, it depends on the company. Some companies will not require that they be fired. It will require that they go to treatment. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. Yes, ma'am.
So how do you approach them as far as what you say to them, you know, as far as drug testing?
As far as the drug test is concerned, the question is how do you approach that employee as far as conducting the drug test? Okay. First of all, you want to have another supervisor with you when you do that, or HR or the owner of the company. You don't want to do that alone. As a matter of fact, as you're documenting the unacceptable work performance, if you can bring another supervisor in to let them know what's going on, so you have another witness to that, so that there's never an accusation that it was something personal between you and that employee, you know. So you want to make it, you want to spread that around as much as you can within the other supervisors. But the way you would confront that employee is, once you have your documented unacceptable work performance and you want to conduct the reasonable suspicion drug test, you bring them in, you have another supervisor there, and you talk to them about their unacceptable work performance. You present them with your substance abuse policy that says that they are not to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol while they're at work. You tell them that you believe that they're in violation of that policy. You can say it this way. This is the way I have said it before, and will say it in the future. I would say, I believe that you are in violation of our substance abuse policy. One of the things that I'm going to do to try and determine what might be causing this unacceptable work performance, one of the things I'm going to do is to send you for a drug test. I'm going to try to eliminate that as a cause of the problem. I'm not saying that you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I'm saying I need to determine if that is a cause of the problem or not. I'm sending you for a drug test. So that's how I would approach it. All right, so within step 2, drug testing, random testing may be required, depends on your state. Blanket testing is definitely not required. Job applicant testing is required. Post-accident testing is required. Reasonable suspicion drug testing is required. Okay? The next kind of drug testing that's required is called post-rehabilitation or post-treatment drug testing. Now, if your company has a zero tolerance policy, that means if an employee tests positive for drugs or alcohol, they're fired. Period, end of story, they're gone. We don't recommend zero tolerance policies for this reason. What if the owner's son comes to work for the company during the summer when he's out of school and he happens to test positive for marijuana? He better be fired, because everybody has to be treated equally. And if you fire one and not fire another, you're going to have a problem. So we don't recommend zero tolerance policies. The way our policy is worded, the legal phrase is this: a positive drug test will result in up to and including termination. Up to and including termination. That means you make a decision on a case-by-case basis whether you're going to fire that person or you're going to allow them to keep their job but require that they go to treatment, okay? If you take that option, if you allow them to go to treatment, no, the company does not have to pay for the treatment. If you allow that employee to go to treatment, they're responsible for the payment on their own, but if you allow them to do that, you suspend them or whatever during that time, however you want to handle that within your company. If you take that option, when they return to work, as a state-certified drug-free workplace here in Georgia and in many other states, you now must conduct follow-up drug testing. And it is at a rate of 1 drug test per year over the next 2 years unannounced. Now that actually helps the employee. That's a hammer that hangs over their head that can help them keep from relapse, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. So post-treatment or post-rehabilitation drug testing is required here in Georgia unless you have a zero-tolerance policy. If you have a zero-tolerance policy, of course you can't do follow-up drug testing. They're gone. You fired them, right? Now, you might say, that worries me, this whole up to and including termination and leaving that up to the supervisors as to who gets fired or not. That concerns me because we might get sued for discrimination. So let's talk about that for just a minute, okay? Here's another reason we don't like zero tolerance policies. Let's say that you have a situation where there is a business owner and he or she has a right-hand man or right-hand woman who helped them build that company from the ground up through blood, sweat, and tears, okay? This employee, we'll just say it's a guy. This man has been a good, honest, reliable, dependable, hardworking employee for 25 years. You've never had any problems with him whatsoever. All of a sudden, God forbid, out of the blue, his wife, who, by the way, was his childhood sweetheart, and they've been married for 30 years, she suddenly dies of cancer. She gets cancer, and within weeks, she's gone. He becomes grief-stricken. In his grief and his sorrow, he begins to drink. The drinking turns to pain medication abuse. That turns to illegal street drug use, and now you have a very serious problem. You catch him on a drug test, either a random or a reasonable suspicion drug test. He tests positive. Do you want to fire him? Of course not. This guy runs your company for you. Of course you don't want to fire him. You want him to get help. You want him to get well. I mean, he's very well trained. You know, you don't want 25 years of experience down the drain. You don't want to have to fire the guy. You want to let him go get help and return to work, right? So that's why we don't like zero tolerance policies, because if you had a zero tolerance policy, you're locked in. You have no choice. You got to fire him, right? So let's say that you send him to treatment and he returns to work and everything turns out okay. Now let's say that at the same company there is an employee who happens to be of a different race than that gentleman. Let's say that that gentleman is Asian, for example, but you have an employee who happens to be American Indian. He started to work 3 weeks ago. In 3 weeks, he's missed 8 days of work, been late every other day he came in, very poor attitude with his coworkers, Productivity is terrible, right? Now he tests positive. What do you want to do? Fire him, right? The guy's only been here 3 weeks and he's a terrible employee. Fire him. Now you might say, but he'll sue me because he is American Indian. He's going to sue me for racial discrimination because I fired him and I didn't fire that Asian gentleman. You're going to be completely fine as long as you have that documentation. That's why documentation is so important. As long as you can prove the reason you kept this guy is because he's been here 25 years and you never had a problem with him until now. And the reason you fired this guy, he's only been here 3 weeks and you've had problem after problem with him. There's not a jury in the world that's going to rule against you in a situation like that. I don't believe. Bob, what do you think? I keep referring to Bob. Bob Barker, he's with Mueller Water Products, and he's one of our board members at the Council on Alcohol and Drugs, and we just love him. He truly has a volunteer heart. He's done so much for this agency, but it's nice having attorneys on our board. We get a lot of jokes about that because we have more attorneys on our board than any other kind of profession, but in that case, Bob, do you agree with what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right, so documentation is critical. So post-rehabilitation or post-treatment testing once per year during the next 2 years, unannounced, to make sure they're staying drug-free. All right, anybody have any questions on the drug testing I've talked about so far? One question, yes ma'am.
Just one quick question. I know you said if they cause the accident, that's the one that you're going to test.
Cause or contribute.
If you're in an automobile accident, your employee is in an automobile accident and it's someone else's fault, does he need to go?
The question is, if you have an employee who's involved in an automobile accident in one of your company vehicles and it's not that person's fault, someone else is at fault, the question I would have to ask you is, what does your substance abuse policy say? Does it say if an employee is involved in an accident that results in $25,000 worth of damage or $2,000 worth of damage or $5,000 worth of damage to company property that they will be drug tested? In that case, yes. Legally, as a certified drug-free workplace, are you required to? No, but if you want to, the company can certainly do that.
I think it just says if there's any property damage. It doesn't give a dollar amount. So
Okay.
if our truck is damaged, then yes, they have, if that's in the policy.
Then that's absolutely
Do
fine.
you recommend that?
Sure, I think that's a great idea. There's no problem with having it in your company policy that if there's a damage to company property, the employee will be drug tested. I don't see a problem with that at all. The company can certainly set that policy. There's nothing that prevents you from that here in Georgia. Now, in other states, I would need to research that. I would need to know what state it is, and actually Stacy would know or Leanne would know because they're experts on all those states. But in Georgia, I would recommend it, but it's not required. Okay. So within step 2, we've talked about the types of drug testing. There is one other type of drug testing. It so rarely applies to companies that I only spend maybe a couple seconds talking about it. It's called routine fitness for duty testing. So it only applies to companies that require their employees to take physical exams. Now, I'm not talking about an annual exam. I'm talking about a routine fitness for duty exam, say once a quarter or so, to make sure that they're physically fit to do their job. Does anyone in here work for a company that requires that? See, no. Well, actually, 2 hands here. All right, in that case, if your company becomes a certified drug-free workplace and you're requiring routine physicals.
Well, we're required it because we have commercial truck drivers and they're required to do it every so often.
Okay, in this case, they're commercial CDL drivers, right? So they're DOT requirements. That's different. DOT is separate than what we call DFWP. What we're talking about here is DFWP, drug-free workplace requirements. DOT requirements are separate. So in that case, of course, DOT would require the drug test. But let's say that you airline pilot and you have to take routine physicals. In that case, well, that's DOT also. That's actually Federal Aviation requirements. So that's not a good example. Let's say you work in the nuclear regulatory industry and you're exposed to nuclear waste. So every quarter you have to take a physical exam to make sure you're not suffering from radiation poisoning. If it was a company like that, then as a certified drug-free workplace, they now have to add drug testing onto each of those physicals, okay? Or if you're a police officer, you know, I told you my background's law enforcement. Some law enforcement agencies require their police officers to take drug tests along with routine fitness for duty physicals. A lot of fire departments require that because you've got to be physically fit enough to run into a burning building, throw a 300-pound guy over your shoulder and walk out, you know, so they got to make sure you're physically fit, and if that is a requirement, then you got to add drug testing onto it. But again, so rarely applies that we just need to spend a couple seconds on it. All right, so yes, sir.
I'd like to go back for a minute
Okay.
to the reasonable suspicion.
Okay.
And Leanne, that's an area where she's on a safety-sensitive job with the needles, and she's taken Benadryl, but she's sleepy.
Mm-hmm.
So as a supervisor, I'd be concerned about allowing her to keep working.
Absolutely. In the case where Leanne is on Benadryl, an over-the-counter allergy medicine, and it's making her sleepy, would you allow her to continue working? Of course not. You stop the action, and you either send her home in a cab, or you have her, you know, if you have a break room where she can, you know, get some rest, and you don't allow her to continue working. But that doesn't mean you have to take her for a drug test, right? It just means you stop the action. All right. So those are the types of drug testing that are required. Moving on to step number 3. In your first year as a state-certified drug-free workplace, you must provide 2 hours of drug education to every one of your employees. Now, that can be done in in 3 ways. One, you can have an in-person presentation. I will be absolutely happy to come to your company. I will not charge you 1 nickel, and I will do 2 hours of employee education for you. But it's still going to cost you a lot of money. You're not going to give me any money, but it's going to cost you money. Why? Let's say that you have 100 employees and you pay them each $10 an hour. For every hour that your company is in operation, how much are you spending in payroll cost? That's easy math, guys. 100 times 10, that's $1,000 an hour. You're spending $1,000 an hour in payroll cost. Now, if I make you stop work, all your employees stop work for 2 hours and listen to me talk, how much did I just cost you in lost payroll? $2,000. That is not even to mention the widgets that aren't getting manufactured or whatever it is your company does, the productivity that is lost. That can run into the multiple thousands of dollars. Most companies do not want an in-person presentation. It's just too costly for them, and I understand that. But that is one option, and I'll be happy to do it for you. It's absolutely free. Now, for those who are watching a DVD in other states, I'm not going to go out of state of Georgia for free, but I will come to your company and do it, but we'll have to work something out as far as a donation to our nonprofit organization in order for me to do that, and we've done that before. So an in-person presentation is one way. The second way is through a DVD, and as a matter of fact, what we're doing right now, this 2 hours, is being videotaped, and this DVD will be available, and I promise you it will go out to tens of thousands of companies over the next several years because we have a pretty strong internet presence where we say, if you want a free drug training DVD for your company, just contact us, and we send it out free. So it's going to go out to thousands and thousands of companies. We'll send it for free. You can have a copy of this as soon as it's ready, and we won't charge you anything for it. But again, you still run into the problem of employees having to stop work, even though you can stop it, work in small groups and have them come and watch the DVD in small groups so you don't have to shut down the whole work site. It's still costly in lost payroll and lost productivity. Most companies don't even want to use the DVD. Only very, very small companies will actually use the DVD. Although companies request it all the time, once they realize that they've got to stop work and watch it, they usually aren't able to do that. So what's the third way? This is the way that 98% of the state-certified drug-free workplaces in Georgia meet the training requirement. It is through a simple one-page monthly newsletter. It's just one page front and back. Here's one right here. A one-page newsletter with information on the front and back. We email that to you if you're our member, if you joined our drug-free workplace program. It's $150 a year. There's 14 benefits of that, access to our attorney, et cetera, but this is one of them. We email you this newsletter. You hand it out to your employees by attaching it to their paycheck or whatever you choose to do. That newsletter counts as 10 minutes of training. What's 10 minutes times 12 months? How many minutes is that? How many hours is that? No lost productivity, no lost payroll. 98% of the 9,700 state-certified drug-free workplaces in Georgia use that monthly newsletter to meet their training requirement. The next I've already talked about the importance of drug education, how that's drug education delivered to a captive audience, whether they like it or not, that they can take home and share with their children. Now, are we naive enough to believe that every single employee reads that and takes that information to heart? Of course not. But we do know, now this is anecdotal evidence, but we do know that a lot of employees do read it because we've had employees call us and say, we really enjoyed that particular newsletter. I took it home and shared it with my children. My kid used that newsletter to write a report on why we shouldn't legalize drugs, things like that. We've had employees say, I take those home and put them on the refrigerator and I make sure my teenagers read them. So a lot of people do read them. Does everyone read them? No. But even if I were to come to your company and stand up and talk for 2 hours, statistically, only 9% of what I say is going to be retained anyway. With the newsletters, we're able to create a certain topic and we'll build on that. It's cumulative. It's delivering drug education in little tablespoon-sized bites that people can absorb and digest and understand. The Workers' Comp Board here in Georgia likes those newsletters because they understand it's an ongoing continuing education process throughout the year. So that's one of the reasons they allow the newsletters here in Georgia. Not all states allow newsletters. You have to check with your individual state. Yes, sir.
In our company, the newsletters go out. Is it required to have them sign that they've received it?
The question is it required that employees sign for that newsletter? It's always best, but legally, no. Here in Georgia, they're not required to sign it. Now, if the Workers' Comp Board sends an inspector to your company or your insurance provider sends an inspector and the inspector walks in and says, you say you're a drug-free workplace, you're getting this 7.5% discount, prove it, right? What you do have to give them as far as proving the employee education is you have to give them all 12 of those newsletters for that previous year that that just proves that you handed them out. You say, these are the newsletters we handed out. They will accept that, okay? Do they have to be signed for? No, it's always best. Now, I'll tell you what some companies do. They actually go above and beyond. The HR director will, or the safety director will read the newsletter. They'll create a little 5-question quiz, and they'll send that out with it, and the employees actually have to read it and then answer the 5 questions to make sure that they actually read it. That's really going above and beyond, and that's great. Yes, sir?
Chuck, another good thing to do, if you can get them signed, is to use that as a signature for safety training to help with OSHA and other things you may be doing. Anytime you get any training signed, it helps your cause with other regulatory things in addition to that.
Very good point. What Mark was saying is, if you do have that signature, that training would apply toward OSHA training, right? Okay. So employee education is step number 3. It's critical. It really helps attack the demand side of America's drug problem. We have these newsletters available in Spanish if you have Spanish-speaking employees. The next requirement, step number 4, is supervisor training. Supervisor training works exactly the same way as the employee education. In your first year, you must have 2 hours of supervisor training. Now, I forgot to mention this about the employee education, but in each subsequent year of certification, the requirement drops from 2 hours to 1 hour. You don't have to have 2 hours of employee education anymore. You only have to have 1 minimum. But all companies continue handing out the newsletter each month. So they're still providing 2 hours of employee education, although the requirement's only 1 hour, so they're going above and beyond that minimum requirement. All right? Supervisor training works the same way. In the first year, 2 hours of supervisor training. It can be done through an in-person presentation. I'll be happy to come and train your supervisors for you if you want me to. Or we can send you a supervisor training DVD, and that's available to our members. But most companies don't want that. Most companies want to use, guess what, supervisor training newsletters. Now, these are newsletters that are specifically for supervisors on how to supervise a drug-free workplace. And they are 1 page, front and back, and they will have topics in there periodically, such as reasonable suspicion. So we may do 3 months on reasonable suspicion. But this is a way to continue giving your supervisors up-to-date and current information, because the laws change from time to time, and so you need to be aware of that, and that's the best way to do it. If I send you a DVD that I made yesterday, 6 months from now, the laws may have changed, and the information that's on that DVD is out of date. These newsletters are current with the law. As I said, we have an attorney on retainer who wrote the law on drug-free workplace in Georgia. He approves those newsletters. He makes sure that anything that, I'm the one who writes them, by the way, he makes sure that anything I say in there is within labor law in Georgia, so that I don't get us in trouble and we don't get our little nonprofit sued, even though I'm not too worried about that. I got a lot of attorneys on our board.
So Chuck, there's 2 newsletters, one for the supervisors and one for the non-supervisors.
One for employees and one for supervisors. The question is 2 newsletters. Yes, employee education supervisors and then supervisor training newsletters. Employee education newsletters and then supervisor training newsletters. One thing I forgot to mention, in most states, as in here in Georgia, you must post a notice that you're a certified drug-free workplace. So we give you the posters and the stickers. When the inspector shows up and says, prove that you're a drug-free workplace, he's got a checklist. That's the first thing he's going to look for. He's going to look for your poster and your sticker. Then he's going to say, I need a file with 7 things in it, proving to me that you really are meeting your requirements. We're going to go over those 7 things in a minute. But supervisor training number 4. Step number 5. Your company must have either an EAP program, an employee assistance program, and is Carrie here? Carrie? Okay, there's an EAP provider. Or Paula? Paula, okay, Paula, that's right. You said hello earlier. Paula works for an EAP, an employee assistance program. EAP programs are extremely valuable. It's been proven that for every $1 you invest in an EAP program, you will get a $7 return on things like reduced absenteeism, reduced tardiness, things like that. So EAP programs are a great investment. If you have an EAP, an employee assistance program, you have an employee who tests positive for drugs, you can send them to the EAP. So I strongly recommend EAP programs. I think the name of your company is Secure Health, is that right? And you guys are down in Macon?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. So that's just an example of one EAP provider here in Georgia, Secure Health. And I know that they do great work because Paula works for them, and she is a former Drugs Don't Work coordinator. She used to work with me on the Drugs Don't Work program. She ran the program down in Warner Robins at an organization called HODAC, House and Drug Action Council. So you must either have an EAP, and usually the cost varies on that, but it's on average, correct me if I'm wrong, Paula, it's about $10 per employee per year, something like that?
Well, no, actually ours is $2.50
$2.50.
per employee.
$2.50 per employee per year. It is a phenomenal employee benefit. It's a way to attract and retain good employees. What that means is if that employee needs counseling for anything, not just for drug or alcohol problems, if they're grief-stricken over the loss of a loved one, or if they're going through a divorce and they need marital counseling, or if they're having financial problems and they need credit counseling. These are all mental and emotional issues that usually surface in the form of physical complaints. They'll call and say, I can't come to work today, my back hurts, or I've got a terrible migraine, when really they're just suffering from some mental or emotional problem. So if you have the EAP, they can go and meet with a counselor, and instead of paying $125 an hour, it's covered because you paid that $2.50 per employee per year. EAPs are great. Unfortunately, most companies don't choose to have an EAP. Of the 9,700 state-certified drug-free workplaces in Georgia, less than 20% choose to have an EAP. The rest of the companies, unfortunately, take the other option. And the other option is you must have a list of treatment and counseling centers in your area that you can give to employees when they test positive for drugs so they know where to go get some help. Where do you get that list? You can get it from the Council on Alcohol and Drugs. We update the list every July 1st because legally here in Georgia that has to be done. We can provide you with a list wherever your company is located, anywhere in the country. We can provide you with an updated list of treatment and counseling centers. You have to have that on file. So those are the 5 steps. Now, if an inspector comes to your company and asks for you to prove that you're maintaining your requirements as a certified drug-free workplace, you need to hand them a folder. May I borrow your folder, sir? And it's best to use this folder right here, the Drugs Don't Work folder. Why? Because they are familiar with this program. And I promise you, we know all 23 of those inspectors. And when they walk in and ask to see proof and you hand them this, they're going to go, oh, you're a Drugs Don't Work participating company? I'm sure it's fine. And they're going to hand it back to you, I promise you. But if you don't have that red folder, they're going to have their little checklist. First thing they're going to do is look for the poster and the stickers. They're going to check that off. They're going to ask you for your folder, and here are the 7 things you must have in that folder. And I could pick anybody in here, and I'll bet you could tell me what those 7 things are, at least the first 5. Number 1, you must have a copy of your substance abuse policy. Number 2, you must have proof you're doing drug testing. What is that proof? An invoice from the lab. Now, you don't want to have results of a drug test in there. Results of drug tests have to be kept separate. They can't even go in personnel files. They have to be kept in a separate medical file. So you can't show an inspector a copy of a drug test, right? Results of a drug test. But an invoice from the lab, or if you were to buy them for us, for example, the invoice where that we send you so you can pay for your drug test kits, that's enough to show where you're getting the drug test kits or where you're doing the drug testing. That's the second thing you must have. The third thing is you must have proof that you're doing your employee education. Now, if you do that through an in-person presentation or by showing a DVD, you need to have a sign-in sheet where the employees have signed in saying that they got the training, all right? If you're using the newsletters, you just simply have to have a copy of each of the 12 newsletters or at whatever point you're at in the year then. So you have to have that in your file. The fourth thing you have to have in your file is proof that you did your supervisor training. What's that? It's either a sign-in sheet where the supervisors say that they listened to the in-person presentation or they watched the DVD, or if you're using the supervisor newsletters, just have a copy of each of the supervisor newsletters in there, right? Okay. You also have to have a copy of your contract or agreement with the EAP provider, or you have to have a copy of that list of treatment and counseling centers. That's the fifth thing you have to have in the file. The sixth thing you have to have is a copy of your completed application, and the seventh thing you have to have is a copy of your certificate. Now, in order to get certified, once you have begun this process, you don't have to have completed it, just begun the process. You can go online to the Georgia State Board of Workers' Compensation's website at www.sbwcdfwp.org, sbwcdfwp.org, and fill out the application. It'll take you about 6 minutes. If you're a council member and you want to, you can call us and we'll stay on the phone with you and walk you through it. Make sure you get certified. We 100% guarantee your certification, by the way. If you were to join the Council's Drug Workplace program and for some reason you didn't get certified, we'll refund every penny. We've never had that happen. We've never had to refund the money. Companies always get certified as a drug-free workplace with us. So you got to have those 7 things on file. All right, before we move on quickly, any other questions regarding the 5 steps or the 7 things you must have on file? Ladies, did I miss anything? Stacy, Leanne, Beth, did I miss anything so far?
This is the annual requirement.
Thank you, Leanne. In Georgia, actually in all states, it is an annual requirement. You must maintain this drug-free workplace requirements throughout the year, and you must recertify every year. So you have to go online every year and recertify. The state of Georgia charges you $35. It's a $35 application fee in order to get your certificate here in Georgia. Okay. Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
If you have a lot of seasonal employees and turnover in that way.
Great question.
Just doing the newsletters on the check will be sufficient if they're really not going to get the whole year.
That's a great question. Here's what the law on Georgia says on that. It says that the requirements of drug-free workplace only have to apply to your full-time permanent positions. So I'll give you an example. There used to be a little amusement park in Mableton called Sun Valley Beach. Some of you may know of that. Sun Valley Beach during the summer has 700 employees. The rest of the year they have 4. Now, they became a certified drug-free workplace. It did not apply, the requirements did not apply to those 700 kids that come to work there in the summer. It only applied to those 4 core staff. So let's take, for example, a temporary help company. Temporary help company may have 1,000 temporary workers, but they've only got 6 core staff members. The requirements of the drug-free workplace apply to those 6 core staff members, not those 600 temporary workers. Now, if they're going to send a temporary worker to a company that is a certified drug-free workplace, before that temp sets foot on that certified drug-free workplace property and could possibly infect it with drug use, that temp has to be drug tested by the agency, and they have to receive at least their first hour of employee education. And in that case, they would use a DVD rather than hand them 12 newsletters to read. Very good question. Thank you very much. So those are the 5 requirements. Very quickly, I'm just going to go over how addiction works on the brain. I'm just going to speed through this because we got about 7 minutes. The American Medical Association has said addiction is a disease. It's just like any other disease. It's like cancer, it's like arthritis, it's like heart disease. Actually, though, it's more like Alzheimer's because addiction is a disease of the brain. It is a chronic progressive disease. It gets worse and worse. Unless something breaks the cycle of addiction, the drug addict or the alcoholic will always progress all the way to 4th-stage addiction. They go through the experimental stage, recreational stage, early dependency, and then full dependency is the 4th stage. And it is the 4th-stage addicts who cannot hold a job, they cannot function in society, they lay in the gutter with puke all over them all day. 80% of the addicted population is addicted because of this genetic or medical model of addiction. It means they inherited an addictive gene. They inherited it from somewhere in their family, and sometimes the addictive gene can skip a generation. There's a type 1 addict alcoholic and a type 2 addict alcoholic. The type 1 is much more severe. In this case, the addictive gene, the type 1 addictive gene passes only from the father to the son. A female cannot be a type 1 addict or alcoholic, only a male. The gene passes from the father to the son and surfaces or turns on, becomes active after age 11. So if you're a man and your dad had a drug or alcohol problem, medical science has proven the chances that you inherited that type 1 addictive gene are extremely high. It's above 98%. Does that mean you will become a drug addict or an alcoholic? Of course not. If you abstain, you never use drugs or alcohol, you will escape addiction. But if you suffer from the type 1 addictive gene, the first time you take a sip of an alcoholic beverage or use an addictive substance, it kicks on the addiction process. It is a chronic progressive disease, and unless a miracle occurs and something breaks that cycle of addiction, you will progress all the way to 4th-stage addiction. There's no way of knowing if you inherited the addictive gene. We can't take you and x-ray you, bring the x-ray and pin it up and say, I'm sorry to inform you, you've got the addictive gene, there's that bad boy right under your armpit. It doesn't work that way. No way of knowing for sure if you inherited it. We can't take a child, an infant, to the hospital and have them run a set of chemical tests on them and have the medical researcher come back or the medical doctor come back and say, I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, your child tested positive for the addictive gene. There's no way of knowing for sure if you inherited the addictive gene until you become a drug addict or an alcoholic, and then it's too late. Because once you're an addict or an alcoholic, you're an addict or an alcoholic for life. Now, you might be currently in recovery. Maybe you haven't used drugs or alcohol for 25 years, but you still suffer from the disease. And the first time you go back and take a sip of an alcoholic beverage or use an addictive substance, you're right back in the throes of addiction. Our attorney that I mentioned, he doesn't mind me telling you this, is a recovered alcoholic. He's gone to 2 AA meetings a week for 25 years. And he says, Chuck, if I miss one meeting, I'm right back in the bottle. He still suffers from the disease. Now, nobody ever woke up one morning and said, you know, I've made a decision. I think what I'd like to do for the rest of my life is I'd like to be a drug addict. I've never heard anybody say I've made a career choice. I think what I want to do for a living is be an alcoholic. I've looked at the lifestyle, the way they lay in the gutter with puke all over them. It's just what I want to do. Nobody consciously decides to become a drug addict or an alcoholic, do they? But they do at the rate of millions of people every year, and 80% of the time it's because of the medical model or genetic model of addiction. Let's talk about how addiction works on the brain. The human brain can only process information in 2 ways. Within the brain, there are all these billions of brain cells, and they face each other within your brain. Human brain can only process information either through an electric-like impulse or through chemicals or hormones. So if I touch this table, my sense of touch is translated into an electrical impulse that runs up my nervous system into my brain, into the billions of brain cells, jumps like a bolt of lightning from one brain cell to another across the synaptic cleft. You probably remember this from biology, and I don't mean to bore you with a biology lesson, but that electrical impulse jumps across that gap, that synaptic cleft in my brain. My brain processes it in milliseconds and tells me, that's a chair. That's one way the human brain can process information. The only other way the human brain can process information is chemically or hormonally. Same thing. We're all made up of a bunch of chemicals and hormones, and they affect the way we think, act, feel, or react. If you doubt that, gentlemen, what happens to a woman once a month when the estrogen level drops in her body? Does that affect the way she thinks, acts, feels, or reacts? Come on, guys, don't be afraid. You've seen it too, haven't you? You've seen their claws come out and their eyes start spinning. What do they call that? PMS. So you see how estrogen can affect the female body. Ladies, what happens to us? What happens to men when we get in our mid-50s and our testosterone level naturally drops? They call that the male midlife crisis. We lose our minds. We go out and buy convertible sports cars, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and we try to date 20-year-olds. It's gotten so bad, medical science has had to develop a testosterone patch that these men in their 50s have to wear. I'm not going to tell you where they have to wear it, but they have to wear it 24 hours a day. It delivers a measured dose of testosterone to their brain to keep them from losing their minds. So you see what estrogen and testosterone can do to the human body. There's so many other chemicals and hormones that affect the way we think, act, feel, and react. For example, there's epinephrine, there's norepinephrine, there's adrenaline. I'm sure you've all heard of adrenaline. I know you've all heard the story, and it's a true story, I'm sure, of the woman whose husband is out in the garage working on the car. He's got the car up on jacks. He's got the two front wheels off. I guess he's changing the oil or something. Somehow he bumps one of the jacks. The car falls on him, crushes his chest. He screams. What happens? She rushes out to the garage and lifts that car off of him. Now, that's not humanly possible, but in that moment, she's able to do it. She has superhuman strength. Why? Because the adrenaline is coursing through her body, and it causes the fight or flight syndrome, right? So in that moment, with superhuman strength, she lifts the car off of him. Now, let me just say that I believe that that's true and that really works. In that moment, she separates her wrists, she breaks her forearms, she dislocates her shoulders, but in that moment, she doesn't feel the pain. And let me stop for just 1 second and say I'm getting a signal from Scott. Are you about to run out of tape, Scott?
3 minutes.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. So you see how all these chemicals and hormones affect the way we think, act, feel, or react. There's one called phenylethylamine that causes us to be attracted to the opposite sex. If phenylethylamine is being produced in your body when you're around someone you're attracted to, it makes your hands shake, your palms sweat, your heart beat fast, and you like it. You don't want to eat, you don't want to sleep, you don't want to work, you just want to be with that person. They call it love. It's just a chemical biological process. There's another chemical called the cuddle chemical. It's oxytocin. When you're with someone you're attracted to, it makes you want to do certain things with them, makes you want to hug them, makes you want to kiss them. As a matter of fact, after sex, here's what happens. After sex, a man's oxytocin levels crash. He ain't got none, probably because he just got some. A woman, on the other hand, her oxytocin levels are extremely high. So what happens after sex, guys? They want to cuddle. What do we want to do? Turn over and go to sleep, right? So what does all this have to do with addiction on the brain? There are two chemicals that are called your happy chemicals. Without the production of these happy chemicals, you cannot feel happy because an electrical impulse does not create a feeling of happiness. What are they? Endorphins and dopamines. If you don't have endorphins and dopamines in your brain, you cannot feel happy. How can we produce those? We can do it naturally. We can produce endorphins through exercise. We can produce dopamine through getting good news. We can also produce endorphins chemically or artificial by drinking alcohol. We can produce dopamine by taking drugs. That's why they call it dopamine. So the problem with this is if you use drugs and alcohol long enough or over a long enough period of time, your brain and your body gets so dependent on producing those happy chemicals, chemically, artificially, it can't do it on its own anymore. So if you try to stop using drugs or alcohol, you become chemically, biologically, physiologically depressed. When that happens, there are only a few ways out of that terrible situation. One way is to relapse, just to feel normal, go back to using the drugs. The other way is to commit suicide. I worked a lot of drug-related suicides on people who would rather die than go back to that drug-abusing lifestyle. The third way out is spiritual, and that makes some people mad. I've known people who are in full four-stage addiction for 20 years. They did one thing and one thing only, and they were delivered from that addiction. They accepted Jesus Christ. Now, that's a flat-out miracle. That makes people angry because they don't want to believe in miracles. It makes them angry because I said that name. You can't say that name outside of church. People write letters and complain about you. I think it's because that name has so much power. But that is one way out of that terrible situation. The fourth way out is counseling, but the problem is most people are in denial. It's very difficult to break through the denial. You know the best way I've seen to do that, though? It's not putting them in jail. It's for a supervisor in a drug-free workplace to sit down with that employee and say, you tested positive for drugs here at work. How'd that get in your system? Boom, you just broke through the denial. Then you give them a reason to want to get well. You can keep your good job if you'll go into counseling. You make the counseling available to them either through an EAP, company-sponsored EAP, or at least through the list of treatment and counseling centers. You give them a reason to stay well. If you come back to work and you keep passing these drug tests, we'll let you keep your good job. That's why I think that, again, drug-free workplace programs are so powerful at attacking the demand side of America's drug problem. That's it, folks. I appreciate your time and attention. I think Mark has one more comment.
Wasn't that a great presentation?
Thank you.
I want to add a real life story to, because when I used to be a superintendent building high rises, and my company came to me and said, we're going to start this drug-free work zone thing. I sat and looked at them and said, I'm in construction. Do you think we have pastors and nurses and nuns building these buildings? What are y'all doing? I'm not going to have any workers. So at first I fought it. What I found out is when we implemented the program and got through it and got it all going, guess what it did? It did just what Chuck's talking about. It ran all the drug dealers off of my job site. And that's when I became a proponent of the program, and this was way back in the late 80s, early 90s. So, Chuck, thank you for coming today. The next session does not start at 1 o'clock. If some people want to stay and visit with Chuck or any questions for me, feel free to stay. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for coming.